Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, Open University.
Hello dear student, have a nice day. Myself Kiran Patel, Assistant Professor in School of Computer Science of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar Open University, Ahmedabad, Gujarat. Dear students, we are going to start with the course RDBMS, Relational Database Management System. In today's session, we will learn about the Block-3, Oracle Server and SQL. Unit-3 is a package and trigger. This is the third part of this unit. Now, we will start with the Block-3, Oracle Server and SQL. In this, Unit-3 is a package and trigger. First of all, we see the agenda of this unit is learning objectives, introduction of package, package components, package implementation, introduction of trigger, level of trigger, user, etc. We already discussed about the package in a previous session. We continue with the remaining topics such as the trigger. After completed this unit, students will be able to understand the concept of package and trigger, how to define the package and access that package, to define and declare the trigger on the various kind of the events, to create, remove and grant and revoke privileges, etc. Now, first of all, we start with the introduction of trigger. What is trigger? A trigger is a block structure or a one type of the stored procedure. The trigger can be invoked automatically when some events occurs. Events means when DML operation like insert, update, delete operation occurs and it affects to the table. The triggering event is specified on the table views, event or a database. We can create a trigger before and after some event occur. Suppose we create trigger before inserting the data into the table, then every time we insert the data into the table, then first trigger is executed and then insert the data into the table. They stored in a database. After compilation, trigger will be stored into the database. Now, this is the basic concepts of the trigger. Trigger is generated only when some events occur. And what is event? I already discussed. Trigger is based on a particular tables, views or database. Now, trigger will be invoked whenever one of the following operations occur. When the trigger occur, the DML commands such as insert, update or delete operation perform on a particular table or a views. Means when we insert, update or delete operation on the table, then trigger is generated or occur. Now, the second thing is the DDL command such as the create or alter primary issues either by the particular schema, user or by any schema or user in the database. So, the third one is the database event such as the log on or log off, errors or a startup or shutdown issues either by the particular schema or user or by any schema or user in the database. Now, use of the trigger. What is the use of trigger? It enforces the business rules that can't be defined by using the integrity constraint. Means what? For example, suppose before insert the records into the table, you can display the message to give the instruction to the user. Then it will possible by the trigger, not by integrity constraint like primary key and foreign key. So the business rule constraints are enforces by the trigger. In my necessary constraint, we define using the trigger. Now, it enables us to gain strong control over the security, because using the trigger, you can give the condition for the valid user to allow doing the operation. The third one is using the trigger can also collect the statistical information on the table access, and using trigger we can prevent the invalid transaction, because before transaction occur we fire the trigger. So the trigger prevents the invalid transaction. It will check it is valid or not. If it is invalid, then it will prevent. It is valid transaction, that it will done. The last one is enforce the referential integrity. When you delete the record from the one table, then trigger to delete the corresponding rows from the another table. Now, the types of trigger. There are two types of the trigger. First is the row level trigger and second one is the statement level trigger. Now, what is row level trigger? A row level triggers occurs once for each row in a database affected by the particular operation. In the case of insert, update or delete operation, the row level trigger is occur multiple times depending on the number of the rows affected. For example, if we delete the statement fire, it will delete the multiple rows of the table. Then row level trigger is occur for each row affected by the delete statement. If the DML statement affected no rows, then trigger is not executed. The create trigger statement, this row level trigger is created using for each row clause to create this level of trigger. In simple example of row level trigger is, if 5 rows are to be inserted into the table, then row level trigger would execute 5 times. And the statement level trigger is what? A statement level trigger occurs once for the number of the rows have been changed. Whether one row or many rows are inserted or updated or deleted, the statement level trigger fires the single time based on the statement. A statement level trigger is occurs once when the number of the rows are affected, or even if there is no rows affected, the statement level trigger are default trigger. For example, if 5 rows are to be inserted into the table, the statement level trigger would execute only once. Now, how to write the syntax of the trigger? First, create or replace trigger and then trigger name. Means it will create the new trigger or replace with the existing trigger, because create or replace. Create means new trigger is created. If trigger is this name of the trigger is already exists, then it will replace by this new code. Now, before, after or instead of means what? It means at what time the trigger get fired. That is, before means before inserting or updating or deleting the records from the table, the trigger will be fired. And after means after inserting or updating or deleting the records from the table, trigger will be fired. And instead of is used to create the trigger on a view. Before and after cannot be used to create the trigger on a view. So, we can use this one, before, after, or instead of. Now the next one is insert or update or delete. This operation means there are more than one triggering event separated by or keyword. The trigger gets fired at all the specific triggering event. Means when we insert the data into the table or update the data into the table or delete the data. Next is the of column name. Means it is used when the trigger is to fire only when a specific column is updated. After that, on table means this trigger specify the name of the table or a view on which the trigger is related. Now referencing old as a O and new as a N. This clause is used to reference the old and new value of the data being changed. By default, we reference the value as a like colon old dot column name, or if you use the new value, then double colon new dot column name. We cannot reference the old value when inserting the record or a new value when deleting the records because they do not exist. Now for each row, this is used only when we create the row level trigger. This trigger is used to fire when each row get affected, or a row level trigger, or just once when entire statement is executed. That is a statement level trigger. Now when, then condition. This clause is valid only for the row level trigger. The trigger is fired only for a row that specify the specific condition. Now after that, begin and then SQL statement you want to necessary data or necessary logic, it will create the SQL statement. After that, end of the trigger. Now see one simple example of creating the trigger. Trigger, create or replace, then trigger name, insert employee. Means this trigger is created when we insert the data into the employee table. It will display the message whenever we insert the new rows into the employee table. See, in the example, before insert, this trigger is fired when we insert the data into the employee table. So this trigger is fired when insert the data into the employee table. Now begin. In this DBMS underscore output dot put underscore line, one record inserted successfully. One record inserted successfully. Now at the end of this trigger. Simple. It is a simple example. This trigger is fired when we inserting the data into the employee table. And before inserting the data into the table, this trigger is executed. And this trigger is display one row records inserted successfully. Same as we can create the trigger on a delete or a update operation also. So here we before or after we can put here, after that insert or update or delete statement is created. So before insert or delete or update, so this will trigger create before when we insert the data or update the data or delete the data into the employee table, then this trigger is created. Now at the end, thank you all. Today we have been discussed about the basic concept of the trigger, such as what is trigger, use of trigger, types of trigger, syntax of trigger, and small example of the trigger. In next session, we will learn about the multiple example of the trigger. If you understand this session and getting the knowledge from this session, then please subscribe the BAOUGujarat. And once again, thank you all.
स्वाध्यायः